In a cold city when every light has gone out, a young woman thought she was closing the door on another exhausting day, only to face an unexpected guest, a powerful man whose eyes carried a loneliness that words could never quite name. And from that last cup of coffee, a story began, one filled with sweetness and ache, powerful enough to move you to tears and to make you believe in the strength of love. That night, the wind swept along the empty street, the yellow streetlights shining down on the rain-soaked pavement as if layering it with nostalgia. Inside the small cafe at the corner of town, the soft golden glow spread across the empty wooden tables, while the scent of freshly roasted coffee mingled with the faint aroma of cinnamon from a half-burnt candle. Sophie, the young owner, was stacking chairs on top of tables as she stifled a yawn. She had spent the entire day serving everyone, from office workers stopping by for their morning lattes to groups of students cramming late into the night. Now, as the clock hand edged closer to midnight, all she wanted was to lock the door, switch off the lights, and finally rest. Just me and a few dirty cups left, she thought to herself, slipping off her apron and reaching for the light switch. But just then, knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed through the quiet room. Sophie froze. Who could be knocking on a cafe door so close to midnight? Through the glass fogged by condensation, she saw him. A tall man in a dark suit waiting outside. His tie hung loose, his shirt creased as though he had just left an endless meeting. His handsome yet stern face carried lines of exhaustion, and his eyes seemed to hold an ocean of loneliness. He didn't try to impose himself, only raised a hand slightly, lips moving as he mouthed, "Just one cup of coffee? Before this day ends." Sophie hesitated. She had never once broken her rule of closing on time. What if he was drunk, or worse, had bad intentions? Yet something in those pleading eyes softened her heart. They looked like the gaze of a child outside a window, longing only for a trace of warmth. She cracked the door open, her voice firm. "I'm sorry the cafe is closed." The man bowed his head, his voice low and hoarse, yet courteous. "I know, just one cup. I promise I'll leave right after." Sophie glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. Who even drinks coffee at this hour? But there he stood, calm, not pushing, not pounding on the door again. And her heart wavered. "Do you even realize what time it is?" she asked, arms crossed. "Midnight," he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "And I believe it's the perfect time for a cup of coffee." Silence stretched between them. Sophie let out a short laugh. What a strange man, she thought. Then, with a resigned sigh, she pushed the door wider. "Fine, but just this once." He stepped inside his gate, steady, not the least bit staggering. Choosing the table closest to the counter, he loosened his tie, leaned back in the chair, and exhaled as though releasing a mountain of burdens. In that instant, the cafe seemed transformed from a nearly closed shop into a private world where two strangers sought a fragment of peace. As Sophie ground the beans, the low hum of the machine blended with the rich aroma of coffee filling the air. The man sat quietly, his eyes following her every movement behind the counter. The way she bent down, the deft precision of her hands in each small step, it all revealed a devotion and patience rarely seen. A faint smile curved his lips before he broke the silence. "This place is so warm. It feels like a little home." Sophie lifted her head slightly, her reply short-touched with pride, yet tinged with weariness. "Thank you. I opened it from my mother's unfinished dream." He nodded, his gaze lingering on an old framed photograph on the wall, of a woman smiling as she held a bouquet of lavender. For a few quiet moments, he seemed to honor the sacred memory hidden behind Sophie's words. Then he looked back at her, his tone softer no longer, mere small talk, but genuine concern. "And you? After fulfilling your mother's dream, what's your own dream?" The sudden question startled Sophie. Her hand paused mid-stir, her eyes flickering with unease. "Are you a journalist?" She forced a laugh masking the ripple in her heart. He chuckled, a short, honest sound that chased away the tension. No, just a man who needed a cup of coffee and a sincere conversation." Sophie placed the steaming cup before him. He closed his eyes, inhaled the fragrance deeply, then took a slow sip. Perfect," he whispered, as though that coffee were the most precious remedy he had ever known. Their eyes met. In that moment, Sophie realized serving him tonight was no longer just a small transaction in a closing cafe. It felt like the beginning of a story, one neither of them yet had a name for. On the nights that followed, the quiet street corner and its little cafe once again sank into silence as the clock hands struck 12, and right on cue, the familiar knock returned. Sophie no longer startled like she had that first night. Instead, she exhaled softly, half in reproach, half in resignation, as though she had come to expect his presence. When she opened the wooden door, Ethan was already there. Still in his tailored suit, though, slightly rumpled now, his hair tousled as if teased by the night wind. His eyes weary, yet filled with quiet anticipation, made it nearly impossible for Sophie to turn him away. "Planning to turn this place into your midnight office again?" She teased her tone light. "Hardly." Ethan shrugged, a faint crooked smile tugging at his lips. "I just want to be sure my day ends with a proper cup of coffee." From then on, his visits became a strange sort of ritual, almost a ceremony. Some nights he would stand outside for a few minutes before midnight, eyes fixed on the clock, waiting for the exact moment to knock. When Sophie once asked him why, he replied with calm simplicity, "It's not an obsession. I just feel the final cup of the day should be exact, perfect, to close everything out." And so, as Sophie's once monotonous nights began to change, in the small cafe, with the tick of the clock mingling with the aroma of hot coffee, two strangers slowly discovered in each other a haven of quiet comfort. Ethan spoke of his cold corporate world with a voice that carried both weariness and irony. Endless boardroom meetings, stacks of reports piled sky high, or ridiculous mishaps at work. A director nodding off mid-presentation, an employee accidentally sending a private email to the entire company. Sophie burst into laughter, her bright ringing voice echoing through the empty cafe, melting away his stern facade. In return, she shared her own simple world around the cafe, the neighbor girl who always begged for extra marshmallows in her hot chocolate, the widowed old man who came daily to read his newspaper with a single cup of weak tea, or the time she accidentally mixed up salt for sugar in a cappuccino, leaving a customer's face so contorted that the entire cafe erupted with laughter. "If you had been here that day, your face would have looked just the same," Sophie said, propping her chin on her hand with playful mischief. This time, Ethan didn't just smile politely. He laughed, truly laughed, a deep, hearty sound that reverberated through the empty cafe. Sophie froze wide-eyed, for in that moment, all traces of fatigue and cold detachment melted away from his face, revealing a man, younger, warmer, more human than she'd ever imagined. He covered his face with his hand, laughter shaking him until the corners of his eyes grew damp. "My God, I can't even remember the last time I laughed like this." Sophie tilted her head, pretending to scold. "Then you owe me entertainment fees. Laughing this loud might shake the foundations of my cafe." Ethan's laughter slowly faded, though a soft smile lingered at the edge of his mouth. His gaze fell on her gentle now, carrying something unspoken. He let out a long breath, as though confessing more than he intended. "If there really were such a fee, I think I wouldn't mind paying it forever." The words slipped out, not abrupt, not forced, but flowing naturally from the warmth of his laughter, from the rare relief he had just discovered. And perhaps because of that, the effect was all the more disarming. Sophie blushed quickly, gathering the empty cups from the table, as if to hide her fluster. Yet her heart raced, pounding wildly, as though his words had knocked on a door inside her that had long remained locked. That night, as the clock ticked on in the hushed cafe, Sophie realized a new ritual had taken root. Quiet, yet steady. The man once deemed cold and untouchable by the city now sat in her little shop, laughing freely at life's simple stories. And the young woman who had only wanted to preserve her mother's dream now felt her heart stir at the quiet presence beside her. Every midnight now carried its own promise, one cup of coffee, one story, and one heartbeat growing stronger. Rain had been falling since the afternoon droplets tapping steadily against the awning, humming like a somber background song. Inside the cafe, Sophie barely had a moment to breathe. For some reason tonight was unusually crowded. A group of students spread their laptops across an entire row of tables. The book club argued noisily over their latest read, and a handful of curious tourists dropped in to try the salt coffee they'd seen online. Behind the cramped counter, Sophie's hands flew in every direction, measuring milk, grinding beans, balancing a tray for table 3. In her mind, she begged the clock to strike 12 soon so she could finally exhale in relief. The doorbell chimed. Sophie lifted her head, her heart dipping and then skipping at once. "Ethan!" He stepped in with a folded umbrella raindrop still clinging to his suit jacket, his polished appearance softened by the damp night. His eyes found her immediately, struggling with 3 milk jugs in one arm and a tray of sandwiches wedged awkwardly in the crook of her elbow. "Looks more like a battlefield than a café." He teased his voice, softened by a rare smile. "Don't mock me," Sophie shot back, feigning annoyance, but unable to hide her grin. "Tonight's busier than I expected." Ethan observed the chaos for a moment. Then, without another word, he shrugged off his jacket, rolled up his white sleeves, and walked straight behind the counter. "Hey!" Sophie's eyes widened. "This isn't a playground." "Yeah, I know," he replied, calm and steady. "But if you need someone to wipe tables or wash cups, I think I can handle that. At least, tonight I want to try being ordinary." Her breath caught. There was something so sincere in his tone that she couldn't bring herself to refuse. Instead, she pulled out an old apron from the drawer, printed with a winking cartoon cat. It's fine. You picked the perfect night. But if you're going to work, you'll follow the rules," she said, holding out the apron. "Put it on." Ethan glanced at the apron and chuckled. "A new emblem for my corporation, perhaps?" "Exactly. Meow Industries. Stand still. I'll tie it for you." As Sophie looped the strings around his back, the crisp scent of mint from his shirt mingled with the strong aroma of coffee. The closeness made her pulse quicken. She hurried to knot the apron, then stepped back quickly, masking her fluster with a brisk remark. "Yes, done. My part-time employee is ready for duty." Standing tall, Ethan saluted like a soldier, fresh on post. Yes, boss." The sight of a renowned CEO in a cat print apron holding a rag to wipe tables nearly made Sophie burst out laughing. He began with earnest effort, though his stiff motions left streaks of water behind. Sophie followed close, adjusting his hand, showing him the small circular motions. "See, even wiping tables isn't just wiping. Everything needs care." Ethan nodded solemnly as though she had just imparted a profound truth. When he tried carrying a tray, he nearly tipped a latte onto the floor, and Sophie had to dart forward to steady it, her heart leaping to her throat. Were you planning to give my café a milk bath?" she scolded, but her laughter spilled out until she had to lean on the counter for balance. Ethan scratched his head sheepishly. "At the company, the only tray I ever carried was filled with presentation slides." "Then your new job is dish duty. Chop night shift employee." He slipped on gloves, obediently following her instructions. Warm water just right, scrub lightly around the rim, set upside down on the rack. On his first attempt, he dropped the cup shattering into pieces. Ethan froze, looking stricken like a schoolboy caught making a mistake. "I'm sorry. I'll pay for it." Sophie bent down, her voice gentler now. "Cups can be replaced. What I need is for you not to let yourself shatter from exhaustion." His eyes lifted to hers, and for a fleeting second, his smile was unguarded, stripped of pride. Then he returned to work, slower, more careful. The sounds of water and clinking porcelain filled the space like a quiet melody of peace. Before long, curiosity sparked in him as he glanced at the espresso machine. "Can I try? Maybe make a latte?" "If you turn my ceiling into a cloud of milk foam, you're cleaning it up," Sophie warned, half joking, half serious. She guided him step by step, his hand trembling slightly as he turned the steam wand. Just as the milk threatened to overflow, Sophie quickly steadied his wrist with her own. Skin brush skin, a warmth both startling and tender, freezing them both in place for a few seconds. Then she pulled back swiftly, continuing her instructions. He poured the milk into the cup, carefully attempting to draw a heart, though the result looked more like a tadpole. Sophie bit her lip to stifle a laugh, then gave a thumbs up. "Not bad for a first try. Even tadpoles can swim toward the heart." Ethan laughed, softly this time, but with genuine joy. "Yes, then I'll retake the test tomorrow. And every tomorrow after that." Neither of them noticed a few mischievous students snapping photos, the famous CEO wearing a cat apron, wiping tables, washing dishes. Within hours, those images would flood social media, stirring chatter across the city. But right then, inside the warm, coffee-scented cafe, neither Ethan nor Sophie cared. For them, it was just a rainy night where a powerful man found peace in ordinary tasks, and a young woman realized that his awkwardness, his smile, had quietly set her heart trembling. That rainy night, the small cafe became their private world, where a CEO turned into a night shift worker, and a cafe owner no longer felt so alone. The rainy night passed, and the city slowly returned to its familiar, steady rhythm. Inside the little cafe, the golden light spilled across wooden tables, while raindrops still clung to the awning, their faint patter like a distant melody. Sophie sat on a high stool behind the counter, absent-mindedly spinning a spoon between her fingers, her gaze drifting toward the cat-print apron hanging in the corner. Since the night Ethan had worn it, his smile appeared in her mind far more often than she cared to admit. That evening, when the familiar knock echoed against the door, Sophie no longer feigned surprise. Instead, she smiled softly, shaking her head as though she herself had been waiting for it. Ethan stepped inside. No suit, no tie this time. Just a simple white shirt, his appearance more youthful, more approachable. "No CEO uniform tonight?" Sophie teased. Not needed. Here I'm just a midnight customer," he replied, sinking into his usual chair with a relaxed ease. Quiet filled the cafe, broken only by the gentle whir of the grinder. Ethan leaned his elbow on the table, watching her movements intently. Sophie caught the look, flustered, and broke the silence with a quick question. "So what about tonight? Want to play barista again?" Not tonight." He shook his head with a faint smile. "Tonight, I just want to listen." Sophie blinked, brow furrowing. "Listen to what?" "Whatever you want to say. I've already told you enough company stories. Now it's your turn." She hesitated, biting her lip. Sophie had never been one to talk about herself. But his gaze, calm, patient, encouraging, drew the words out of her. Finally, she sighed, her voice quiet, deliberate. "And this cafe. It's my mother's legacy. She always dreamed of opening a little shop with a window overlooking the street. Pastries in the morning, warm coffee at night. But she passed away from heart disease before she could make it real. I didn't want that dream to vanish with her. So, I built it." Her voice trembled, her hand tightening around the spoon. "There were times I thought I couldn't go on. The debt, the side jobs. But every time I broke down, I remembered her smile. I couldn't let her dream die with her." Silence followed. Ethan didn't interrupt. He simply looked at her, his eyes holding her story, as though it were fragile and sacred. Then he murmured, "You're strong." Me?" Sophie gave a short, bitter laugh. "Maybe just stubborn." Ethan set down his cup, his posture straightening, his eyes darkening with something deeper. "I lost my father when I was still in college. The day he died, the entire company fell onto my shoulders. I didn't have time to cry, to dream. There was only one path: be strong, be unyielding. People look at me and say, I'm cold, ruthless. But really, it was just armor to survive." Sophie froze. For the first time, she didn't see a successful, untouchable CEO sitting across from her. She saw a young man once robbed of a father's presence, burdened with years of solitude. "Do you ever feel lonely?" she whispered. A sad smile touched his lips. "Loneliness has been my most loyal companion all these years. I just never dared admit it." The cafe fell still. Time itself seemed to pause, leaving only the ticking clock and the lingering warmth of coffee. In that silence, they shared more than words could ever hold: fears, childhood memories, the truths they never revealed to anyone else. Sophie remembered rainy nights when her mother would sing off-key jazz to lull her to sleep. Ethan recalled his father taking him to the harbor, teaching him how to read the wind to predict arriving ships. They laughed when they discovered they both hated raisins and pastries. "Raisins are betrayal," Sophie declared solemnly. "You think you're biting into chocolate, and instead you get sour disappointment." Ethan laughed, a carefree, genuine sound. "Exactly. Rarely do I find such an ally." When the clock struck 1, Sophie startled at how quickly time had slipped away. Tilting her head, she said softly, "You should rest. Tomorrow you'll have a mountain of work waiting." Ethan glanced around the cafe, then back at her. "This place is easier to breathe in than any office. But all right." He stood, slipped on his jacket, and paused at the door. "Thank you for sharing. I'll keep that secret for myself." Sophie smiled gently. And I'll keep yours that the cold CEO is really just a son who misses his father. Ethan stopped, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Sounds like a headline, but it's true. Then he stepped out into the night. Sophie remained behind her hand, resting on the warm cup, her heart heavy yet strangely light. For the first time in years, in sharing her pain, she didn't feel weaker. She felt heard. In the quiet, they had given each other the most precious gift, the chance to see the person hidden behind the armor. Days after that night of heartfelt confessions, Sophie still carried the echoes of their words within her. Ethan, no longer the distant CEO in headlines, but a man who had lost his father and lived in solitude, kept replaying in her thoughts. And that evening when he walked into the cafe, his eyes bright but restless, Sophie knew something unusual was about to happen. He sat at his usual table, fingers laced together, tapping lightly against the wood. Taking a deep breath, he looked straight at her. Sophie, I need to ask you for a favor." She arched a brow, half teasing, half wary. "Don't tell me you're opening a competing cafe. I'm not ready to battle a whole corporation." Ethan chuckled softly and shook his head. "Nothing like that. Tomorrow there's an important company gala. I have no choice but to attend. But if I show up alone, the press will swarm me with questions about my personal life. I want you to come with me." Sophie froze. "Me with you? Just pretend you're my date. You don't have to do anything. Just be yourself." His voice was earnest, his eyes pleading. She turned away, her heart twisting. Images flashed in her mind, women in glittering gowns dazzling under crystal chandeliers, and her, just a cafe owner, sometimes with flowers still dusting her cheek. "I don't belong there," she whispered. "I'd look completely out of place." Ethan leaned closer, his gaze steady and deep. "That's exactly why I want you there. I'm tired of fake smiles, hollow words. I just want someone real by my side." Her chest tightened. No one had ever made her feel that her ordinary self could be valuable. Yet in his eyes, that very simplicity was what he sought. She gave a hesitant nod, smiling shyly. "All right, but you'll have to accept one thing: I don't walk gracefully like those magazine ladies." "Good. I wouldn't want that anyway," he replied, a rare brightness lighting his eyes. The following evening, Sophie stood before the mirror in her small room above the cafe. A pale blue dress draped softly over her frame, simple yet elegant. Around her neck hung an old silver necklace, her mother's final gift. Looking at her reflection, she whispered, "Mom, if you were here, you'd laugh at me tonight." The doorbell rang. When Sophie came downstairs, Ethan was waiting. This time he was every bit the figure from magazine, covers a tailored black suit tie, perfectly knotted shoes gleaming. Yet the moment his eyes met hers, that sharp, icy image dissolved. You look beautiful," he murmured, his voice so genuine. Sophie flushed crimson and turned away. "Don't start sounding like an ad," she muttered. "Come on, or we'll be late." The city's grandest hotel glittered with light. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, their reflections dancing across the marble floors. Guests in flowing gowns and tailored suits mingled with glasses of wine in hand. As Ethan and Sophie entered, cameras flashed instantly, a storm of attention directed at them. No, I'll make a fool of myself," Sophie whispered, squeezing his arm. He bent down, reassuring her. "Just imagine they're cafe customers, loud, nosy, but none more important than your cup of coffee." Her lips curved into a small laugh, and her nerves eased. Ethan moved through the crowd, offering polite greetings, but never once leaving her behind. Each time he introduced her, it was simple. "This is Sophie, my friend." No elaborate titles, no embellishment. At one table, a female executive asked, "Yes, and what do you do, Sophie?" "I run a small cafe. Every cup has its own story," she replied honestly, her eyes lighting up. The table chuckled in delight. The woman studied her, nodding approvingly. "That sounds far more interesting than our dry reports." Ethan sat beside her quietly, watching, his gaze filled with a pride he could not hide. Then a reporter pushed through the crowd, bluntly asking, "Mr. Ward, is this your new girlfriend?" The room fell silent, all eyes on them. Sophie froze, her heart hammering in her chest. But Ethan only smiled, replying with a mix of truth and humor. "She's the only person who's ever made me wear a cat apron and wipe tables. Do you think there could be anyone more special?" The room burst into laughter, the tension evaporating. Sophie lowered her head, cheeks burning, but inside her chest bloomed a warmth at his gentle defense. When the gala finally ended, Sophie sighed as though she had run a marathon. Outside by the car, she shook her head with a laugh. "I'm certain I'll be in the papers tomorrow." No doubt about it," Ethan said lightly. But tonight was worth more than any headline. His eyes found hers. Not the calculating gaze of a CEO, but something deeper, more vulnerable, more sincere. Sophie turned away quickly, hiding the tremor in her heart. That night, as their car rolled away from glittering lights, Sophie realized she had stepped into his world, a dazzling yet suffocating realm. And for the first time, she asked herself, could a small cafe owner like her ever belong in that place? That gala was not just an invitation. It was a turning point where two worlds, one simple one, grand, collided, setting the stage for trials neither had ever imagined. Rumors didn't crash in like thunder. They crept in quiet and insidious like raindrops seeping through an old roof. At first, it was just a few online headlines CEO Ethan Ward spotted with Lancaster heiress. Sophie laughed them off. Such gossip wasn't unusual. Wealthy men were always surrounded by speculation, and the press thrived on it. But 2 days later, the city's largest newspaper printed a photo of Ethan standing beside a glamorous young woman of noble lineage. Across the front page, bold letters screamed, "Power Wedding CEO Ward to announce engagement." Sophie's heart sank beneath a crushing weight. She held her half-finished cup of coffee, but the familiar bitterness suddenly tasted unbearably harsh. That night in her cafe, she felt the stares of customers, curious, pitying, intrusive. A neighbor muttered, "Honeymen like him don't belong to folks like us." A careless remark, yet it cut her deeply. When midnight came, rain poured down again. Sophie wiped the last table of the cafe, eerily empty. Inside her, a storm raged louder than the one outside. She had always known Ethan's world was nothing like hers. But seeing that photo made the old fears claw back with a vengeance. She remembered her best friend who once loved a wealthy man. At first it seemed like a fairy tale. In the end, it was only humiliation and scorn, the relationship shattered like glass. Sophie had sworn she'd never let herself fall into that same trap. Then, knock, knock, knock. The sound she had grown used to as a signal of warmth now felt like a hammer striking her fear. Sophie froze, breath caught. She closed her eyes, then slowly turned off the lights and pulled the curtains tight. Outside, Ethan stood in the rain, his white shirt plastered to his skin, his tall frame blurred by the downpour. He knocked again, his voice hoarse yet resolute. "Sophie, open the door. I need to talk to you." Inside, Sophie sank to the floor, her back against the door, hugging her knees. Tears streamed down her face, blending with the pounding of her heart. She could hear the rain, could hear the tremor in his voice. But her mind screamed, "Don't give in. If you open the door, you'll only be hurt again." Ethan didn't leave. His knocking grew heavier, more desperate. "You can hate me, but don't believe their lies. The one I want to be with has never changed." Sophie clutched her knees tighter, whispering through broken sobs. "Don't say it. I can't bear it." In the darkness, she remembered him fumbling in the cat apron, his awkward laugh the night he said, "If there's an entertainment fee, I'd gladly pay it for life." Those memories rushed back, sweet, fragile, and now crushed beneath the roar of gossip headlines and judgmental stares. Fear swelled, drowning what little faith she had begun to nurture. Outside, Ethan stood motionless, rain streaming down his face, his hand pressed against the doorframe. His voice cracked, but his resolve did not. "Sophie, I don't know how to beg. All my life, I've only commanded signed contracts. But with you, I can't lose you to lies. I'd rather stand here all night than turn away." A fierce gust rattled the curtain, and Sophie broke into sobs. She knew he was truly there, unyielding. Yet the door between them loomed like a wall dividing two worlds, the powerful man beaten down by a storm, and the fragile woman trembling from the fear of love. Time dragged, 1 hour, 2. His knocks grew weaker until only a hoarse whisper slipped through the cracks. "I'll wait until you believe me." 2 days later, the media frenzy swelled. Stocks wavered. Ethan's empire trembled. Finally, he chose to confront it head on. At a hastily arranged press conference camera, flashes exploded. Reporters swarmed the hall. Ethan stepped up to the podium, his stance firm, though his eyes burned red from sleepless nights. Drawing a steady breath, his voice rang out. The rumors of my engagement to Miss Lancaster are utterly false. He produced evidence exposing the rival's scheme. The room erupted in gasps. But Ethan didn't stop there. I also have something else to say. The only person I want by my side is not a powerful alliance, not a high society beauty. It's a simple girl. The one who makes me coffee at midnight. Chaos broke out. Reporters shouted over each other. Who is she? How long have you been together? Ethan only smiled faintly, his eyes glimmering with a light not seen in weeks. I don't need to hide anymore. She's the one who reminded me I'm human. In her small cafe, Sophie stared at the laptop screen, stunned. Each word pierced her chest, tears spilling freely onto the keyboard. Anger swirled within her. Why hadn't he warned her? Why expose her so suddenly? And yet beneath the fury was a tidal wave of emotion because he had stood before the world and chosen her. In the days following the press conference, Sophie's cafe was no longer the quiet refuge it used to be. The air buzzed with whispers, customers sneaking glances at her, conversations half-muttered, "Is she the one from the news?" Her regulars tried to act casual, but the curiosity in their eyes was unmistakable. Sophie forced smiles as she poured coffee, but inside, her heart was a tangled storm. She felt gratitude toward Ethan. He had stood before the world stripped of his armor, declaring his truth. But alongside that, gratitude simmered hurt. He hadn't warned her. He'd left her to absorb the tidal wave of gossip and scrutiny alone. Every night when she locked up, she sat frozen in the dark cafe, her thoughts unraveling in endless knots. That night when the familiar knocking came, Sophie froze. The sound no longer carried just warmth. It was now a test of her trust. She pressed her palm against the door, the chill seeping through the wood. Outside, Ethan's voice broke the silence, low and rough, tinged with fatigue yet unwavering. Sophie, I know you're still angry, still afraid, but please give me one chance." She shut her eyes, tears brimming. Inside her mind, two voices battled. "Don't open it, you'll only bleed again. Open it, he's already proven his love." Her heart pounded so hard it nearly choked her. His voice came again, slower trembling. "I've lived my whole life in boardrooms under flashing cameras, but I never felt I belonged anywhere until I stepped into your cafe. I'm terrified that one day you'll leave and I'll fall back into that emptiness. Sophie, I'm not afraid of losing my company or my reputation. The only thing I fear is losing you." His words broke through her defenses like warm water melting ice. Sophie's hand trembled on the lock. With a faint click, the mechanism shifted. The door creaked open. There he was, Ethan. Tall, exhausted, his shirt, wrinkled hair tousled by the wind. His eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights, yet when they met hers they blazed with light. One last cup of coffee?" he asked hoarsely, lips curved in the faintest smile. Sophie burst into tears, not of pain alone, but of release. She turned the key fully and opened the door wide. Ethan stepped inside, slow and careful, as though any sudden move might frighten her away. Her hands shook as she set up the coffee filter, spilling grounds across the counter. Ethan came closer, but stopped at a respectful distance. Only when she placed the steaming cup on the table did he pull out a chair and sit across from her. They stared at each other, silence stretching broken only by the rain tapping against the awning. Then Ethan spoke, every word deliberate, etched with resolve. "Sophie, I can't promise you an easy life, but I promise I'll never let go of you no matter what the world says." Her voice quavered raw with fear. "I'm scared I'll never be enough, that I'll always be a shadow in your world." He reached across the table, his hand warm and steady as it covered hers. "You are my world, no bigger, no smaller, just you." Her tears flowed freely. She pushed back her chair, and Ethan rose too. He stepped around the table and pulled her into his arms. His embrace was broad, unshakable, wrapping around all the fear she had tried so long to hide. Her face pressed against his chest, she heard his strong, steady heartbeat. Real grounding, undeniable. "Look, cry," he whispered into her hair. "Don't hold it in anymore. I'm here." Her sobs poured out, washing away the dread, making room for something new. fragile but alive. Sophie realized then love wasn't the absence of pain. It was having someone willing to stand with you in the rain, no matter the storm. That night, the cafe glowed golden against the darkness. Outside, the rain fell without mercy. But inside, in each other's arms, Sophie and Ethan knew they had weathered their first storm together. The moment she opened the door wasn't just acceptance. It was a vow that real love had begun. Winter finally arrived. The streets wrapped themselves in a blanket of frost, every breath turning into thin mist in the icy air. Yet Sophie's cafe glowed warmly against the cold, its golden light spilling through the windows, drawing people inside like a hearth. For many it became a sanctuary, a place where the bitterness of winter was chased away by coffee and kindness. And through it all, Ethan was there, no longer just the midnight customer. He had become part of the cafe itself. He wore the cat print apron, clumsily washed cups, wiped down tables, and crafted lopsided lattes that made customers laugh. The regulars had stopped being surprised by his presence. In fact, they delighted in it. Whispers floated among them that this cafe didn't just serve coffee, it brewed a love story. Sophie would catch herself watching him, the way he carefully split a cookie in two, so they could share it, the way his brow furrowed when he concentrated on steaming milk, the way his entire demeanor softened when he leaned close as she adjusted his collar. Love wasn't a grand gesture. It grew in these quiet, ordinary moments. One evening, the snow-laden wind blew colder than usual. The cafe bustled with laughter and chatter, customers huddling inside. Ethan, though, seemed different. He was restless, checking his watch, fumbling nervously with the milk jug, stealing glances at Sophie. When the crowd thinned and only a few tables remained, Ethan finally called softly. "Yes, Sophie, come here a moment." Wiping her hands on her apron, she walked over. On the counter sat a cappuccino, steam curling into the air. Ethan held the milk pitcher, his hands trembling slightly, though his eyes stayed fixed with determination. Slowly, carefully, he poured, letting white swirls blend into the rich brown surface. Sophie expected another tadpole heart gone wrong, but as the froth settled, her eyes widened. Letters emerged clear and deliberate. "Marry me." The room fell silent. Even the last few customers leaned forward, holding their breath. Sophie's hands flew to her mouth as tears welled instantly. Ethan set down the pitcher, lifted his gaze to hers, and spoke, voice low and raw. "Sophie, I once had everything, but never a place that truly felt like home. You gave me that. With every midnight coffee, with every smile. I want to hold on to that forever. Will you marry me?" Sophie's hands trembled as she held the warm cup, memories flooding back. The night he stood outside her door in the rain, the clumsy laughter in the cat apron, the way he listened as she spoke of her mother. Every moment, every word, every laugh had led here. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her lips curved into the brightest smile. She nodded, her voice breaking yet sure. Yes, I will." The cafe erupted. The elderly gentleman who always read the paper clapped loudly. The group of students cheered. She said yes. Laughter, applause, and joy filled the small cafe, turning it into a stage for shared happiness. Ethan hurried around the counter, dropping to one knee. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. Inside, a silver ring sparkled under the cafe lights. Simple, elegant, but filled with sincerity. His voice shook as he held it up. "This is the only contract in my life I never want to negotiate. Sophie, be my wife." Through her tears, Sophie laughed, extending her hand. "Only if you promise, no more broken cups." The cafe roared with laughter. Ethan slid the ring onto her finger, then rose and pulled her into his arms. Applause thundered around them, phones raised to capture the moment. But to Sophie, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season drifted down, blanketing the street in white. Inside, Sophie and Ethan stood hand in hand, their faces lit by the cafe's warm glow. "You know," Sophie whispered, "love doesn't need castles or grandeur. Just a small cafe, a cup of coffee, and someone willing to stay until the very last sip." Ethan squeezed her hand gently, his voice tender. "And I promise, you'll never drink the last cup alone again." In the breath of winter beneath golden lights, their love story, born from a midnight knock on the door, closed its first chapter, only to open a lifelong journey ahead. Life after the proposal wasn't a fairy tale with troubles magically erased. There were still worries, still storms. But for Sophie and Ethan, that moment had marked a promise they would walk forward together no matter how loud the world outside roared. Sophie still opened her cafe every morning, greeting customers with her warm smile. Only now, a clumsy night shift employee often stood beside her, wearing the cat apron, sometimes spilling water, sometimes breaking cups, but always filling the cafe with laughter. Ethan still led his vast company, still faced tense meetings and endless numbers. But when midnight came, he no longer felt alone in his sterile office. He knew a golden light was waiting at the street corner, a girl ready to brew his last cup of the day. Customers began to see the cafe as something special. They didn't just come for coffee, they came to witness a love that had blossomed from small, ordinary moments. Sophie and Ethan became living proof that happiness isn't found in luxury, but in finding someone willing to sit beside you until the very last sip. Outside, winter snow fell thick and white. Inside, golden light glowed. Sophie leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder, whispering, all this from a single knock on the door. Ethan smiled, tightening his hand around hers. And I'll keep knocking for the rest of my life. And in that moment, they both knew. Their love story would carry on day by day, night by night, in the warm glow of a little cafe on the corner.